Hello, and welcome to the 2022 Historical Society of Mount Lebanon Annual Fundraiser. My name is Alyssa Jones, and as co-chairwoman of this year's event, I want to get straight to the point. Funds raised this week through our exciting online auction will fuel the History Center's operating budget for the next year. But what does this really mean? Well, 1 year ago, we hosted this event, and because of your generosity, the Historical Society continued productive partnerships with the Mount Lebanon Library, the Dennis Theater, Bethel Congregation, and the school district. Remember when the History Center was a basement stop on the Pittsburgh History and Landmark Foundation second grade walking tour? Well, this year, the Historical Society will run those tours with the help and expertise of our amazing docent guides. New for 2022, the Historical Society hosted a bus tour of Mount Lebanon for over 30 newly hired teachers in our school district. Don't worry, we also hosted a number of non-school related tours, including our very popular Bell Book and Scandal tour and the Saints in Stained Glass tour, among others. Check out the events tab on our website and follow us on social media for more information and offerings. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, we made the front page of the Wall Street Journal. In partnership with our friends at Britsburg, our History Center hosted a proper Trooping of the Color and celebration of Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee. Did you participate in this fundraiser last year? If so, then guess what? You made these events happen. And if you're joining us for the first time, a huge thanks in advance for ensuring that the Historical Society is able to continue these community programs, as well as many more that are in the works. Speaking of things that are in the works, have you seen all of the progress our capital campaign has made? Last year, we gave you a sneak peek of our rooftop deck project, and this year it will become a reality because of some very generous donors. Our rooftop has sweeping views of uptown Mount Lebanon and will be available to rent for private events. Please reach out or stop by to learn more. And don't worry, naming rights are still available for a select few spaces here at the History Center. Our event and auction committees have been hard at work procuring fabulous prizes and organizing this week's events. Special thanks to these board members and volunteers, you know who you are, for all of your hard work. The ever-popular online auction is now open for bidding and will close on the evening of Thursday, October 6th. In addition to over 100 prizes, all donated by local businesses and friends of the Society, we have opportunities to purchase items for the History Center from our wish list, as well as options to join us or renew your existing Historical Society membership. Before I turn it over to our board president, I want to note that this is an exciting week for all of us, as we celebrate the fact that we have not only a vibrant Historical Society, but one that is housed in a fabulous brick and mortar History Center. Whether your photo is in one of the Mount Lebanon High School yearbooks proudly preserved here in the History Center's library, or you're a transplant from Kansas City like me, raising your kids in this deeply rooted community, our Historical Society connects us. So stay tuned for updates from our board president, Jeff Hurd, as well as an exciting look at our current exhibit with John Delano and John Conti. Spoiler alert, upon visiting the new exhibit, you might just find out that Mount Lebanon copied something from my own hometown. Keep me posted if you figure out what it is. Special thanks to our event sponsors. Please enjoy the program, bid generously and bid often, and come visit us at 794 Washington Road very soon.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Hurd, and it's my pleasure to serve as the president of the talented and hardworking Board of Trustees of the Historical Society of Mount Lebanon. Welcome to our annual event. Thank you for watching this presentation and for all the support that you have provided us throughout the year. There are many interesting discoveries made about the history of Mount Lebanon. Almost weekly, some new artifact, biography, or event is uncovered. One of the more charming experiences took place this summer. A father and his rising middle school daughter visited the History Center, As is often the case, they were interested in learning about their home. Some research uncovered an interesting story of a community birthday celebration in 1935, oddly celebrating Mount Lebanon's 23rd anniversary. A key event was a parade through Dormont and uptown Mount Lebanon, and as part of that celebration, by popular vote, the community elected a princess, Geraldine McNeely, and a little lady Lebanon, Betty Jo Heineman. These were both children, as well as an adult maid of honor, Dorothy Kane, and a queen of Mount Lebanon, Mary White. Our young visitor departed happy to know that she lived in the precise home occupied by the Queen of Mount Lebanon 87 years ago. Each year, the Society recognizes a History Maker of the Year. Mount Lebanon athletic programs have an exceptional record of developing physical skills, competitiveness, and sportsmanship through a large complement of programs. Athletes, their families, coaches, trainers, and administrators work hard to develop and support well-rounded teams. In the 2021-2022 season, we thrilled to these achievements. 12 section titles, 7 WPIAL titles. The girls' basketball team competed in the state finals, and the football team brought home their 5th state championship, the first since the creation of a statewide playoff system. For athletic accomplishments, Mount Lebanon High School became the first school to be recognized by the Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Elementary and Secondary Schools as a program of distinction. Mount Lebanon has produced Olympic champions and professional players, along with thousands of athletes who learned, grew, and benefit from athletic competition. In recognition of this long, important, and successful contribution to our community, the Historical Society names Mount Lebanon Athletics as the 2022 recipient of History Maker of the Year. And we are formally opening our latest exhibit, Shaping Mount Lebanon, Why Our Town Looks the Way It Does. A decade after the founding of Mount Lebanon in 1912, with the opening of the Liberty Tubes pending, the construction of residential neighborhoods was proceeding at a feverish pace. In 1922, developers were beginning to promote the Second Country Club Hills Plan, Cedarhurst Manor, Sunset Hills, and Mission Hills. Many thanks to John Conti, Tim Steinauer, and Mike Cahill for their work in putting together this exhibit that explains this work, and to Pat Hurd, Jim Wojcik, Susan and Hal Morgans, and Margaret Jackson, as well as the Mount Lebanon Public Information Office for their assistance. Please visit the History Center Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. to see their work. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, John Delano and John Conti, who will introduce the exhibit, Shaping Mount Lebanon, Why Our Town Looks the Way It Does.
Hi, I'm John Delano, a member of the Mount Lebanon Historical Society Board and a long time resident of Mount Lebanon. And I'm delighted to be here with John Conti, who for over 30 years has been studying the history of Mount Lebanon has served on the Pennsylvania Historic Preservation Board, and is also a member of the Mount Lebanon Historic Preservation Board that advises the township officials on all things historic in this community. John, it's a great pleasure to be with you, sir.
Good to meet you, John.
Thank you very much for being here with us. I wanted to ask you first, we've got a number of exhibits to take a look at and help folks understand. And the part of this is to encourage people to come right here, uptown Mount Lebanon, to visit this exhibit, to see the wonderful things that are here. But let me just ask you the basic question. What makes Mount Lebanon so unique as a community?
The important thing to think about is that Mount Lebanon is unique because we're 100 years old. A lot of our housing stock is progressively, year after year, becoming 100 years old. And what makes a 100-year-old housing interesting is when it's well kept, when it's well preserved. One of the outstanding features of Mount Lebanon is we were one of the first suburbs in the country designed for the automobile, so that our street patterns were quite unusual, very high quality, and that is absolutely unique. There's nothing else between Philadelphia and Cleveland that is quite like Mount Lebanon.
You know, I think a lot of people forget that we are an older suburb. We're not one of these new developments that have occurred in the last 20 years or even in the last 50 years. Most of our housing dates way back even before World War II. Yes, and I know the house that I live in was built in the 1920s. And all of that happened because of a tunnel that seemed to open up the city of Pittsburgh beyond the city borders. Can you tell us what happened?
The tunnel was extremely important because that meant that this 1920s and 30s housing that we have so much of in Mount Lebanon is all concentrated. You might find 20s and 30s, beautiful 20s and 30s houses in other neighborhoods, other parts of town. Squirrel Hill is an example. But nowhere do you have block after block after block of 1920s and 30s housing, and very distinguished 1920s and 30s housing.
This exhibit that we're going to take a look at really is a demonstration of how that happened here at Mount Lebanon. And there's some very interesting stories that I know you're the expert on how Mount Lebanon's neighborhoods developed with stone and brick and oftentimes very, I mean, we're up on hills. It's Mount Lebanon, you know, that means we're on a mountain or we're on a hill, and everything is like this in Mount Lebanon. How did it come about? Aside from the Liberty tubes being put in there, how did it come about?
Well, one of the interesting things about the hills, if you come out, say, on the trolley from downtown, when you're in the first neighborhoods that you come through, like Beachview and so on, you're looking at huge hills where the streets were put down in a regular gridiron pattern. So you have very, very steep streets there. In fact, you have one street that is the steepest public street in the United States, right down the road, right down Banksville Road from here. And that was a bad pattern for the hills. So Mount Lebanon, Dormont was mostly on a grid. You look at the streets, you'll see that.
By a grid, you mean like squared, straight streets?
Blocks, yeah. And Mount Lebanon started out that way. But the big change occurred right here across the street from us, practically, when Mission Hills was put in 1922. It was designed by landscape architects, and it took streets and adjusted them to match in long drives the curves of the hill.
Which explains why many streets south of Uptown have this curvature.
Yes.
The streets curve around because they're blending in with the hills, the slopes of the
They're
hills?
blending in, they're taming the hills is what they're doing. Instead of running up and down the hills, they're running with the contours of the hills. And in addition, the streets were not just designed for the contours, but because they were landscape architects designing them, they are designed with an idea of a vista down the street, a view down the street. And anybody who's been a gardener, a serious gardener, knows that there are curves and there are curves. Some curves are more beautiful than others. Well, these developments designed by landscape architects have the beautiful curves, not the so-so curves.
Right. So this all began in the 1920s out of Mission Hills. That was one of a number of developments that occurred.
That was the first.
That was the first. But if I understand correctly, this was not an original idea of the developer. It actually comes out of all places, Kansas City.
A few things about Kansas City. One, it's not flat. You get south of the city, it's very hilly.
I think that will surprise a lot of people who've driven out that way.
And the developer who developed a town called Mission Hills in south of Kansas City was very influential in the development profession in the United States.
John, I wanted to move to this exhibit here, and this is one of many here at the Historical Society, because the whole idea of how we built Mount Lebanon does have some roots in England.
Absolutely.
And I think that'll surprise some people. Can you tell us, what are we looking at here? And this reference to basically Downton Abbey? What's
Yes.
that all about?
Okay. Way back when I started looking into this, I discovered that the ideas for a naturalistic landscape for housing goes back to 18th century England. And a couple of designers, one by the name of Capability Brown, and I discovered later on that Capability Brown designed the landscape still intact for Highclere Castle, which is the place where they shot Downton Abbey.
John, we're sitting in a replica of a 1930s living room on Longview Drive. That happens to be the street I live on. And I think it's fascinating that here at the Historical Society, you've reproduced a room that was really part of the original landscape, interior landscape of a Mount Lebanon home. How did you come about this idea, and where'd you get the model for this?
Well, we were fortunate to get an album from the Casti family, from Lucian Casti's granddaughter, in fact, or Lucian Casti's daughter, of the houses that the Castis built in Mount Lebanon in the 1930s. And they had several interior living room pictures. And what we realized, I guess should have occurred to us, was that life in the living room tended to center around the radio in those days. The same way that today it often centers around that huge big screen TV in the family room, right? Typically, people would sit near the radio where they could hear it and they could tune it. This radio would even bring in short wave, okay? This is almost identical to the radio that was in that living room that we have the picture of across the way.
It's really very fascinating because I think we tend to think that we live in an era with lots of changes. But the truth is that those who lived in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, into the 50s, those were some amazing changes in technology. From electricity, telephone, radio communication, later on television in the late 40s. I mean, all of this is happening. And of course, Mount Lebanon, which would be, as we've discussed, at the high end of the economic scale, given the housing stock, clearly the most advanced technologies are likely to be in the homes of Mount Lebanon in the 1930s.
That was absolutely true. We have a statistic that suggests, based on surveys at the time, that a house in Mount Lebanon was 3 times as likely to have electric refrigeration as houses elsewhere in the county. So that technological change, gas heating as opposed to coal, electric refrigeration for food, the radio communication, the predominance of the automobile, all of that started in the 1920s. And just
How about telephones?
rapid
Did we
change.
have lots of telephones in Mount Lebanon then?
There certainly were. In my house, we had a nook built into the wall to hold the telephone that would hang on the wall.
The nook is still there in my house, as are coal cellars.
Yes,
Which I
yes.
think many homes in Mount Lebanon still have,
Yeah.
as we transform from
Coal to natural gas. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we've done here, aside from recreating the idea and using period furniture and a great period photograph, is we have the book Babbitt over here.
Oh, yes.
Which was published in 1922, describing a real estate a businessman, and how all the changes were affecting his life. And then underneath it is Middletown, which was the study, the major sociological study of Muncie, Indiana, that showed all the changes that the automobile, the radio, movies, and so on, all the changes that were occurring in Muncie in the 1920s.
You know, this has been a fascinating discussion with you, and I know we could go on for hours and hours. There are so many wonderful exhibits here. Why do you think it's important? Everyone in Mount Lebanon should understand this historical society of Mount Lebanon and should really support this organization and come visit. Yeah. What do you think is the most important reason why we should stay connected to our past?
It's always important to know where you came from. When you make decisions about how you change your house, when you make decisions about how you change streets in the municipality, it's really important to know why it was there in the first place, so that you don't take away accidentally the things that it turns out you realize you value the most.
I know that personally because I have some old windows that on one level I'd love to replace, but on another level I know are pretty historic and you just got to be careful.
I have the same problem in my house.
Yeah, that's one of the problems perhaps of living in Mount Lebanon. If you have a historical bent, you really want to preserve a piece of the past for the future.
You want to preserve the looks of the houses as much as possible because style of the streets, style of the houses is, as you started our discussion, what makes us unique.
Well, Mount Lebanon truly is unique, and again, I want to encourage everybody to come visit the Historical Society to see this fascinating exhibit that John Conti, our expert, has put together with the help of others here. We really appreciate your expertise, John. Thank you, sir, very much for spending time with us today. I appreciate it.